Okay, I'm in the Gospel of John, chapter 10. Gospel of John, chapter 10. And I'll be between verses 30 and 42, so I'll be finishing up the Gospel of John, chapter 10 in this message. What was happening in the previous message, I was explaining that this was a conversation that was taking place between Jesus and the people at the temple during the Feast of Dedication. And the end result of this conversation was that Jesus wanted to communicate to them that he really was God and that God is going to be his own Messiah. They were looking for a man. They wanted a man to be the Messiah. They did not want God himself to manifest as a man and be the Messiah, but they just wanted a man. Now you might wonder, what would be the problem with this? I mean, why would there be why would this be such an obstacle? Why would they not want God personally to be his own Messiah and to be their own king directly, and for there to be a relationship with him and his people directly? Why would they not want that? Okay, well, of course, you have to ask them, and even if you did, it's unlikely that you would get an honest answer, but that's the obstacle that we have, is that we can't really say for sure why that would be the case. You could perhaps run into people today and you could ask them, what would be your concern? I can tell you that there are some things that could be very likely, that there's a high probability that there are some specific reasons why they would not want God to be in this kind of a position personally. One of the reasons is, of course, these are all consequences. Okay, it's the consequences that could result. One of the reasons is that, well, now you've got God who's having this personal interaction with you, all right, and you don't have a man. But if you had a man, well, men are not perfect, okay? Men are flawed. We are sinful. We have problems, all right? And this can be good, according to some people, for a number of reasons. For example, the king can be manipulated, all right? You can tell the king, the man, lies, and he might believe them. And if he makes decisions according to the lies that you told, well, then you have manipulated this person. You've had this influence which is most likely going to be destructive. But if you have God who's in this position, well, he's not going to be manipulated like this. So there is an appeal to have a man who is the king, because there is an opportunity for you to manipulate, to lie, be dishonest, all right? And you're not going to be able to get away with that if it's God. He's going to know, all right? And you might think, well, this sounds so strange. Well, it's a real possibility as to why some of these people would not want God to be that close to them, all right? This is a reason why a lot of people want there to be a man who is between them and God, because they can kind of keep God at a distance and the man can be manipulated. And they don't really want to know God. They don't really want to have a relationship with him. So the man is a better alternative. This is another way of trying to approach that. They did not want God to be in their presence because they wanted to keep him at a distance. Okay, what happens but what happens when he finds out that they are not perfect either? Well, he might exercise some divine judgment, but they could hide that. They could hide their imperfections from another man who is king. These are some possibilities. Okay, there is great appeal in having a man who is flawed, who is in the position of prominence, whatever it is. This can be a good thing for some people, because then they can compare themselves with that guy and they can say, oh, you see this guy who's in charge, this guy who's our leader. Well, he's got this problem and he's got that problem. and he's not good in this way and that way. We need somebody like him, because see, we're not like him. We're not like him, so we can step on him in order to elevate ourselves. All right, and since he's the leader, well, we're maybe the leader or the person of prominence, but we don't really, we're trying to be humble, that kind of stuff that people will tend to do. So there is a desire for someone who is flawed, who does have struggles, who does have significant problems, who does have sin, because when the follower or the person who's attached to them is challenged to maybe participate or change, or they're going to be confronted with their own failures, well, now they got something that they can compare themselves with this other guy, and they don't need to, or they think they don't need to be held, or they shouldn't be held accountable for their own failures or for their own sins. And they will express that by immediately pointing out all the flaws and all the problems that this other guy has. I'll never forget one church that I went to stop in and see what was going on there. And I discovered that the pastor of the church, every single sermon, he would remind everyone of a sin that he had committed, I don't know, I think it was like 15 years prior. Every sermon he reminded the people he had committed. And I looked around and I wondered, are you guys like getting tired of this? Is this bothering you? Oh no, we like this. This is good. And I explored that a little bit more. And this is what I discovered, was that they like that because if there was any point of challenge on their part, they could say, well, at least I'm not like him. And he's the one who's in charge. So, everything's fine. And of course, well, God is kind of out there, and well, if there's an issue with us, that God may condemn us, well, God's going to go after him first. He's going to go after him first because, obviously he has these sins, and he reminds us about it every Sunday morning. So this is how people think. All right, this is how people think. These are some of the reasons why they do not want God to be their king, to be their Messiah, to be in their life. It's because of these dysfunctional issues that they have. All right, well, in verse 30, Jesus says, I and my Father are one. Just John chapter 10, verse 30. I and my Father are one. And the way that the people understood this is this guy is definitely declaring himself to be God. Okay, so even if you don't approve of the way that Jesus said this, or you have some questions about how he said this, you don't like the choice of words, you have an issue with his communication style, whatever that may be, what's important to see is how do the people understand what he said? Right? They picked up a bunch of stones because they said he was committing blasphemy. That's what they understood. And in a sense he was. He was declaring himself to be God. In a sense he was, except for the fact that it was true. Okay? Jesus is God. He is the Father. That's who he is. He really is. So he's not committing blasphemy because it's the truth. But if you or I said something like that, then that would be by definition a form of blasphemy. All right? That's what was happening. And I was explaining this in the previous message. All right? Let me go back to what was going on in the Old Covenant a little bit. I have a reference here for 1 Samuel chapter 8, all right, to give a little bit of historical precedence in order to help you get a different perspective about how things ended up the way that they did. In 1 Samuel chapter 8, what happens was that Samuel was getting old, and his sons were kind of taking over his role, but they were no good, okay? There's a belief for some reason, especially within Christianity, that ministry is sort of by inheritance. That if there's a great Christian leader and he has a son, well, then his son is going to pick up where his father left off. And this is not a good idea, all right? Trust me on this, okay? This is not a good idea at all. Ministry by inheritance is not a good idea, all right? I personally believe that every ministry that may be founded in order to support a teacher who is teaching, when they are done, if you don't find someone who's going to legitimately fill in for the person who was doing that before, that ministry should end. It should be dissolved. All right. If somebody wants to start another one, start another one. Go ahead. But this idea of ministry by inheritance, that is not a good idea. All right. Every person needs to have their own personal convictions. They need to have their own testimony. They need to have their own struggle with regards to how did they surrender to the new covenant themselves? What were the obstacles that they had to overcome to become who they are now? Right? Every person needs to have that. What is their relationship with their God? Right? I have a relationship with my God, but I cannot give this relationship to anyone. All right? None of my children, none of my friends. I can't say that I have this relationship and now I'm going to give it to you. Everyone has to build their own relationship with another person, and they have to build their own relationship with the Lord. All right? And so this idea of ministry by inheritance, you got to watch out for this one, because it tends to not work out well for those kinds of reasons. All right, in 1 Samuel, let me turn back to that. 1 Samuel chapter 8, beginning in verse 1, "Now it came to pass, when Samuel was old, that he made his sons judges over Israel." He made his sons judges over Israel. He was old. He was tired. He was not, he's expecting he's not going to do this for very long. So you would think, put his sons in charge. They were with his father. Well, you know what? Just because Samuel was a great man, all right, and had a personal relationship with God, and just because he raised his sons, that doesn't mean that his sons are going to be like him. All right? It doesn't. In general, it doesn't work out that way. It's actually unusual. All right, it's good if it happens, but look, folks, it's kind of unusual. In verse 2, "The name of his firstborn was Joel, and the name of his second Abiah. They were judges in Beersheba, but his sons did not walk in his ways. They turned aside after dishonest gain, took bribes, and perverted justice." Again, all right, they turned aside after dishonest gain. They took bribes and they perverted justice. That's what they did. "Then all the elders of Israel gathered together and came to Samuel at Ramah and said to him, 'Look, you are old, and your sons do not walk in your ways. Now make us a king to judge us like all the nations.'" This is their solution. Samuel, you're going to be dead soon. Your sons are not helping. They're making the situation worse and awful. We can't have these guys. So the solution we want you to give us a king like all the other nations have. Let's do it that way. Look, that's not the only solution that they could have used. That was not the only solution. Maybe there was another person like Samuel in the country who had a relationship with God. That would be another prophet. Okay, if they don't have one of those presently, you don't need to have one of those, it's fine. Then you can get a priest. All right, get yourself a priest. In the law, there are instructions for the priesthood, and the priest does not need to have a relationship with God. The priest just needs to follow the instructions. Okay? That's all that the priest needs to do. Now, these are the elders. These are the elders. The elders could select a priest. Samuel could select a priest. They don't need a king, just someone who will follow the directions, who will proclaim what the law says, and the people will just simply do what the law says with regards to the conflicts of life. that God gave. God gave the law. You just follow the law. You just need a priest for that. No relationship with God required. Right? All they had to do was select a person. And as the elders, just like the elders are going to Samuel saying, we're not gonna deal with your sons anymore, they could deal with the priest in the exact same way. They could they could observe, they could monitor the priest, and if the priest fails to execute his responsibilities as the priest, they can replace him. Get another guy. Maybe one of them could take the role. But no, they say, we want this kind of a solution. We want a king, just like all the other nations. Now that's a rejection of God, because that's not the way that God established the country, the nation that they had. God defined the nation to be governed by the priesthood. All right? And they don't want that. They are rejecting their God, and that's what happens. Again in verse 4, then all the elders of Israel gathered together and said to Samuel at Ramah, and came to Samuel at Ramah and said to him, look, you are old, and your sons do not walk in your ways. Now make us a king to judge us like all the nations. But the thing displeased Samuel when they said, give us a king to judge us. So Samuel prayed to the Lord, and the Lord said to Samuel, this is the indication of a prophet, someone who has a relationship with God, heed the voice of the people in all that they say to you, for they have not rejected you, but they have rejected me, that I should not reign over them. That's what God said about that. Well, I guess this is a rejection of me. All right? So be it. Okay? God said, fine. You want to reject me? Here you go. You want a king who's a man? There you go. Now, we come to the time of Jesus. A long time has passed. A lot has happened since then. And now, God himself manifests in the flesh as a man. And he is presented to the nation as the king. Here's the guy. You wanted a man? Here you go. God manifested in the flesh as a man. So, will you take him now? Huh? Will you take God now? Will you accept him now? Will you stop rejecting him now if he shows up personally as a man to be the king? No, because he says he's God. So, God kind of snuck in a small way, snuck in quietly and calmly to a degree, and presented himself as the king. And they said, oh, well, we found out that he's actually God, so no, we're not going to take him. Okay. That's what's happened. Jesus answered them, verse 34, is it not written in your law, I said, you are gods? If he called them gods to whom the word of God came, and the scripture cannot be broken, do you say of him whom the Father sanctified and sent into the world, you are blaspheming because I said I am the Son of God? I'll come back to this in just a minute. All right, I'll come back to verse 34 to 36 in just a minute. Before I do that, though, let me go to verse 37 and 38. In verse 37, if I do not do the works of my Father, do not believe me. And I explained in the previous message that this was kind of the nature of the confusion. The nature of the confusion was that Jesus was doing these works, and they acknowledged these works. They understood these works. They believed the works. They just didn't believe. They didn't want to believe that he was the Messiah. So they believed part of the truth, but not all. If they would have rejected the works, then there wouldn't be any discussion. But it's because they accepted the reality of at least most of these works that was the nature of the conflict, because they weren't willing to accept all of the truth that Jesus was presenting. In verse 37, if I do not do the works of my Father, do not believe me. But if I do, though you do not believe me, believe the works, that you may know and believe that the Father is in me and I in him. All right, so again, in verse 36 and verse 37 to 38, we have these additional phrases that emphasize that Jesus is God manifested in the flesh. Now, we can look at this and we can have our own, personal interpretations of things. We can say, well, he says here that he's just the Son of God. And in our minds, well, the Son of God can't really be God, everlasting Father, because you got the Son and you got the Father. And so these got to be two different persons. That's how a lot of people will look at this. But you got to know the prophets. All right, you've got to know the prophecies. My favorite is Isaiah chapter 9, verse 6. I like this one a lot. It's just, it's mine. Of the one that I like. In Isaiah chapter 9, verse 6, it says, "For unto us a child is born." All right, that's a person manifested in the flesh. All right, I got a baby. A child is born. Unto us a son is given. It's a male. All right, and the government will be upon his shoulder. That sounds like a king to me. And his name will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father. All right, yes, you have a child who is a son. He's going to be the king, and it's going to be the mighty God, the everlasting Father, who shows up personally like this. So Jesus is it. That's who he is. Prince of Peace, of the increase of his government and peace, there will be no end upon the throne of David and over his kingdom, in order to order it and establish it with judgment and justice from that time forward, even forever. The zeal of the Lord of hosts will perform this. The Davidic line began, close to this. It began through Saul, in a sense. Go back and read the history of what happened. The people rejected God. You got the Davidic kingdom out of that. And so God shows up many generations later and says, okay, how about if I be the king now? And they said, no. All right? Even though he qualified in every way required, they still said no. Okay, let's go back up to verse 34. Jesus said to them, "Is it not written in your law, I said, you are gods?" Well, this wasn't really written in the law, per se. This was written in the Psalms, which is not part of the law, but, it's kind of close. They would have considered this to be part of the law in an abstract sense, so I'm not going to pick at that one. But you've got a quotation here from the Psalms, and this is from Psalm 82. I'll turn to that in just a moment, Psalm 82. When you read it here, you can get the impression that Jesus is trying to defend himself. He's giving a defense. Doesn't it say? Is it not written in your law? I said you are gods. So why can't I be like a god? Isn't that okay? And that is not what he's saying. Right? That's not what he's implying whatsoever. There's no defense happening here. This is an aggressive assault. All right? This is an expression of condemnation towards them cast in this question. That's what it is. It is an expression of condemnation. And I know it can be difficult to see unless you read Psalm 82. And so I'm going to turn to that. Psalm 82. Fortunately, I have these things bookmarked for this morning. Psalm 82. Verse 1. God stands in the congregation of the mighty. He judges among the gods. How long will you judge unjustly and show partiality to the wicked? All right, going back to Samuel and what caused all these issues to begin with. He's he's judging among the gods in the sense of see, there are these leaders, and they don't really accept the living God. They will say that they believe in a God who's just simply not really the same God as the real, true, living God. And so they've got these little G's, all right? These little gods that they believe in that are not real, that are their own fantasies. And God is asserting the fact that what their beliefs are based on, the kind of God they want to believe in, the kind of king they want, all that stuff is false. All right? So when he says he judges among the gods, he's judging among these abstract ideas. But the intent is to speak directly to the people. All right? How long will you judge unjustly and show partiality to the wicked? That's Psalm 82, verse 2. This is a back reference to what was happening with Samuel and his sons and why they established a king to begin with. And Jesus, by referring to Psalm 82, is telling these leaders that they also are judging unjustly and are showing partiality to the wicked. They're definitely showing some indications of that in the way that they are treating him. They are. Verse 3, defend the poor and fatherless. Do justice to the afflicted and needy. Deliver the poor and needy. Free them from the hand of the wicked. And what he's referring to, the person who wrote this, he's referring to those circumstances when these people are victims of crime. All right? That's what he's referring to. And that they may not have the resources to be able to defend themselves as well as they need. So help them out. Verse 5. They do not understand, nor do again, verse 5, they do not know. They do not know, nor do they understand. They walk about in darkness. All the foundations of the earth are unstable. I said, you are gods, and all of you are children of the Most High. You shall die like men. All right, so it's in verse 6. It's in verse 6 in this psalm where he states, I said, you are gods, in this sense. You are gods, or you are in this abstract position. All right, but are you really, a good? Are you a legitimate God? Are you a legitimate ruler? Are you a legitimate king? No. I said you are gods, and all of you are children of the Most High. I'll come back to that phrase in just a moment. But you shall die like men and fall like one of the princes. Arise, O God, judge the earth, for you shall inherit all nations. And that's what Jesus did. Jesus arose. He inherited the earth, and he judges the earth and all nations. All right? Verse 8 has been fulfilled in that sense. And an ongoing fulfillment is taking place. But at verse 6, let me go back up to this. In verse 6, and all of you are children of the Most High. Well, they are children in the sense of creation, in the sense of their existence. But they are not children of the Most High in accordance with the new covenant. That's not what's being indicated here. All right? They are children according to the fact that they are created being and they exist on God's planet. But they are not children of the Most High in an eternal context, in the context of salvation. Those are two completely different things. So if you look through Psalm 82, I think you can have confidence to know that Jesus is not saying that to defend himself. Well, I can say this because doesn't it say that you are gods? No, it doesn't say that. It doesn't mean that. All right, what this means is that through what is further expressed here, what it means is that you people are not fulfilling your responsibilities as elders and leaders of this nation. Again, in John chapter 10, verse 34, Jesus answered them, is it not written in your law? I said, you are gods. It's a way of saying, you are the ones, and you will die like men. You will. All right. You will die. You will not be a part of the kingdom of heaven. You're unjust. Okay? You're showing partiality. There's all these problems. You are not legitimate rulers. You are just like the sons of Samuel. That's who you are. That is what I believe is expressed in verse 34 to 36. All right, now moving forward into verse 39, therefore they sought again to seize him, but he escaped out of their hand. I explained this in the previous message. In verse 40, John chapter 10, verse 40, and he went away again beyond the Jordan to the place where John was baptizing at first, and there he stayed. Now, this is interesting, the way that John puts this here. To me, this is very interesting. This, to me, is a way of describing closure. Jesus started his ministry at this location, at this spot where John the Baptist was baptizing. He left, and now, after all that he has done, he went there and he stayed there. He rested. It was as if he had fully accomplished all that he came to accomplish. There are still some more things he's going to do, of course, but this to me is a way of describing closure, that his ministry is complete, that he has done, what he came to do. There's some more to do still, of course, but this is a significant point of closure in his ministry, to return to where he started from. This is a big deal. When he was there, in verse 41, then many came to him and said, John performed no sign, but all the things that John spoke about this man were true. That's an expression of closure. And many believed in him there. So you could look at this from the perspective that he began his ministry there. He went out and he did it, and he was observed, and people watched him and paid attention and studied and learned and considered. And then when he came back and he rested, they looked at all that he had done and they said, everything that was said about this man is true. And so at this point of closure, there were many people who looked at this, and they decided to make a decision. They made a decision. They waited, they observed, they paid attention, and then at this time, when they saw that Jesus had reached this point of closure, they made a decision. Not all of them, I'm sure, but there were many. Many made a decision. They made a decision to believe in him at that point. That was when they believed in him. And that's great. If they didn't want to decide before, they didn't want to decide before. They decided now. If they wanted to wait another week or two or another year, so be it. But the important thing is that they made their decision. And when they did, those who believed in him made the right one. Right? Many believed in him there. Okay, so I really wanted to show you that and to help you understand what was going on. All right, so that's where I'm gonna stop in this message. It's a little bit sooner than what I would normally do, but I think this is a good point to just pause and end. And I'll begin in John chapter 11 in the next message. This is when Jesus then went and raised Lazarus from the dead. And there is a lot to be said about this in order to understand the relationships and the interactions that were taking place at this time. All right, so for those of you who are using this for your small groups, I got a question for you that you can work with. What do you think about people wanting a man to be like their Messiah? That they would rather have a man who is kind of like their Messiah than God himself. What do you think about that? Have you experienced things that are similar to that, that are related to that, either that you've struggled with or you've seen other people get into, that they use another man as an alternative or as a substitute for having a relationship with God personally? What are your thoughts concerning that, and what are your experiences that you may have had that are related to that? This is a good thing to talk about and to understand, because when you go into the world and you speak with people, you'll find a lot of people like this. All right, and as you're having your conversations, I want to warn you. Don't use this as an opportunity to compare yourself with these other people who are no good and who are deceived. All right, and when you go and interact with folks, don't necessarily express condemnation towards them because, oh, you just worship some man, you don't really want to worship God. All right, that's not going to be productive. All right, trust me. It's just, in general, people just don't get motivated in a positive way from that kind of interaction. It can just give you a little bit of a better perspective and a little bit of a better understanding. And then you can go look for those things that are the reasons why. Not look for ways of expressing condemnation towards the person, but what are they afraid of? What are they concerned about? As an example, they may be concerned that God will discover, if they have a relationship with God, well, God will know about their sin. But, if they have a relationship with this guy doesn't know about their sin, so they can feel safe. Well, the issue is not trying to get them to have a greater dependency on God instead of the man. The solution is to deal with the sin issue, to deal with the issues related to forgiveness. And those other things will take care of themselves. You never have to address them. All right? You just need to help a person to understand that God does not hold their sins against them anymore, and why, and what that would mean in their life if they would pursue it further. All right, what is the relationship then that they can experience between them and their God? And let that be appealing so that they can begin to have a relationship with God and let go of this proxy relationship that they have through some other guy, to reach God through this priest or pastor or whoever, but can begin to build one between themselves and God personally. All right, that will be more constructive. All right, so that's what I'm going to leave you with right now, and I will be back for the next message into John chapter 11. Thanks.